Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lindy Ruano, and I am with Eastern Cells of Southern California and the Disability Tribe Initiative. Today's live webinar, Understanding Unconscious Bias and Embracing Cultural Diversity, will be offering Spanish and ASL interpretation. For those in need of Spanish interpretation, please click on the white globe at the bottom of the screen labeled Interpretation. Then click Spanish and you will have the choice to mute original audio. You will then be able to hear Ruben Diaz provide a live and simultaneous interpretation of the webinar. In the Spanish channel, if you select mute original audio, you will only hear the interpreter. Otherwise, if you do not select mute original audio, you will still be able to hear the English presenters in the background. Our ASL interpreters are L'Oreal and Suzanne. They have been spotlighted so they can always be seen throughout the presentation. Depending on your device, this may mean that sometimes you cannot see the presenters. We do apologize for the inconvenience, but we want to make sure that this live meeting and recording can be accessible to everyone. This presentation will have closed captioning, which you can access by using the button at the bottom of the screen. Next slide, please. A few things to note about Zoom before we get started. This meeting is being recorded to allow us to refer back to today's discussion and the input we receive. You can hear and see us, but we cannot hear and see you. Everyone has been automatically put on mute and your camera is not on. Chat is activated for attendees. However, chat is not activated for attendees. However, presenters will be sharing some information through the chat during the webinar. If you would like to ask questions or provide a comment, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We also ask that you indicate which presenter you would like to send the question to. We have staff monitoring and responding as necessary. Some questions will be answered in real time. Some will be saved for the live Q&A at the end, or we may ask for your email address so that we can follow up with a more thorough answer after the webinar. For those of you on a phone or a device, you may not be able to use all of the features we discussed. We will be providing other options for you to access materials or ask questions later in the webinar. Finally, at the end of today's webinar, we will be asking you to participate in our post-event survey. Once the webinar is over, a new window will pop open with the survey. Please provide your feedback so we can improve on future events. It is now my pleasure to introduce Amber Carey Navarrete, Director of Person-Centered Services at Eastern Cells Southern California. Amber?
Lindy, and thank you to all of you for attending today. On behalf of myself and the Disability Thrive team, we are glad to be starting this community discussion about unconscious bias and disparity within our service system. As you can see today, we will be covering what unconscious bias is, how to address it and the disparity it causes, discuss with people how they see it impacting their day-to-day lives, and finally, the solutions, community organizing, and other resources, as well as each and every single one of us can do to create the change needed. Next slide. I would like to ask Elizabeth Grisby with the ARC of California and Golden Gate Regional Center to now join me as we tackle just what unconscious bias means. Next slide. The easiest way I know to explain unconscious bias, also known as implicit bias, as you can see here, is to differentiate it from our conscious bias, also known as explicit bias. First, we need to realize that between our 5 senses, taste, hearing, sight, touch, and smell, our brains take in millions of bits of information every moment. If we had to be aware of all of these bits of information, it would cause complete overload. So our amazing brains figured out a way to handle this. The part of our thinking brain that we are aware of is our conscious. It deals with only a small amount of information at a time, which our brain has decided is most important in that moment. whereas all the other millions of bits of information are sorted quickly and easily into categories by our unconscious mind without us even realizing it is happening. As information comes into our unconscious, it's decided whether it's good or bad, makes us happy, or feels dangerous, and many other categories. It is very much like the glacier you see in this photo. We only see a very small amount of it, but it is more than 10 times this size, and most of it is below the surface. The unconscious mind is much like this, with all that sorting happening below the surface. And how it sorts the bits of information is based on the experiences we have had and the messaging we have been receiving throughout our lives, whether from our family and friends, society as a whole, the mass media, and more. The most important thing to recognize between what is happening in our conscious and unconscious minds is that they don't always agree with each other. For example, our unconscious might be sorting information into a quote unquote bad category based on the prejudices and stereotypes that we've been exposed to in our society. But if we were aware of that thinking, we simply know better and don't agree with those prejudices. The unconscious sorting of information into categories may have been helpful to keep us safe in the early days of man, but in our modern society, it can have negative real-world consequences. Next slide. Now I'd like to turn this over to Liz to share some of what the real world impact looks like when it comes to biases.
Okay, thank you, Amber. Okay, the real world biases for me. As I was growing up, I was asked, what ethnicity are you? Are you African American? Are you mixed? What are you? And I was like, I'm a human. I'm a girl with multi-racial background. And then as I got older, they started on my disability as you can't go to regular schools because you have a disability. So you're not like everyone else. And I was just, I didn't know where I fit in. And when I got in high school, it was like this, when I fell in love, you have to, first of all, you can't date, because as we all know, how the story used to go, people with disabilities are not supposed to know about love. They're supposed to be protected from everyone. They can't have feelings of love. So that was another bias that was put on me. And when I said about my sexual orientation, that was it just blew people over the top. My foster mom was like, isn't it bad enough you have a disability? Now you're telling me you're bi. And it's like, one doesn't outweigh the other. So all these biases that people put on people with disabilities they can do more harm than good. And the latest bias that was put on me a little while ago is you put on way too much weight. That was just like, really, it just kind of set me, kind of hurt my feelings. I'm dealing with all this other stuff. Now you're telling me I weigh too much. It's like, come on. Can't we just have a life like everyone else? Can we just be who we are without putting all these labels on us? Life would be so much better and easier if everyone would just accept each other for who they are and what they bring to society. If we were all the same, life would be pretty boring and pretty dull. So I'm asking you today, who's watching our webinar, to really look inside yourself. We all have biases, but most importantly, we need to stop and ask ourselves, are we saying things to people to really make ourselves feel better about ourselves? Is that why we're trying to put all these labels on everyone? Because we're afraid to look at ourselves and say, I'm okay with my identity. I'm okay with who I am. Because when we take a real good look at ourselves, maybe we wouldn't be so quick to judge other people. Yeah. And from there, I'm gonna throw it back to my friend Amber.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you for sharing your personal experiences. And I think you really illustrated so many points beautifully there. Like you said, we all have biases. And as we're learning, some of them we're not even conscious of. So like you said, taking that look at ourselves and really reflecting and being extra conscious about our interactions with people, the labels we're using, and all of these sort of things is kind of a step in the right direction, hopefully. And it seems to me you also bring to awareness the fact that people with disabilities are already encountering a lot of bias in our culture, but that as we look through these different social groups, that could just end up being compounded with more and more of these that people possibly identify with, right?
I do want to add another thing. When people are born with disabilities, it's already a given that if you go through all these services, from from early childhood, from CCS to the regional center system, they automatically diagnose you and put a label on you. I want each and every one of us at this webinar, can you do this one thing for me? If you know someone with a disability, and most of us do, and you work in the field with people with disabilities, put yourself in our shoes. Think about if you had a disability, would you want to be labeled as someone with a behavior problem, or would you want to be looked at as a person that has emotions, who are trying to communicate in the best way they can? And if it seems like it's a quote unquote behavior problem to you, maybe it's the only way they're able to communicate. So
really good point.
Before you write a report, think about that.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Liz. Really important points, all of those. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, the research shows us that unconscious biases are oftentimes developed in our childhood, but it sounds like, Liz, from what you're talking about, some of those labels and things that are common for people with disabilities, those might even have ended up being created in part of the service system, right? And through our careers and things like that. And so as it shows here, these unconscious biases have real world effects on our behaviors and thus our interactions with each other, right? And that might be some of what you're talking about and what you're seeing. But the good news is that we can take steps to change our unconscious biases and to really become aware, like you were saying before, become more self-aware and start to take measures to, at least if we can't necessarily in a moment's notice change our unconscious biases, at least keep them in check through our behavior and through our interactions until our unconscious biases get more in alignment with our conscious choices. Does that make sense to you, Liz?
Yes.
Next slide, please. So the thing, like you're saying, sorry there, I hope I didn't cut you off. The thing that it sounds like you're saying is that we see the repercussions of this in the different systems, right? Different service systems. As we can see here, research shows that it's apparent in the criminal justice system, the educational system, healthcare systems. Would you say then, or do you have anything you want to mention in how you see it perpetuated in the disability service system?
In our own system, it's perpetuated a lot when in the IPPs, it's getting a lot better, but we still have a ways to go in the IPPs before somebody writes something positive about the person that they serve. They always have to put a negative spin on it. I want you guys to realize the negativity that you write in there stays with the person for a long time. If you write in the and put it in their file saying somebody hasn't spoke after you did the evaluation on them, and you just because they didn't talk right then and there, you're gonna write down their MR, their mentally retarded. That happened to me just because I didn't speak then and there to the psychologist when I was young. I was labeled to have mental retardation. And as I was talking to Amber the other day, the only reason I didn't speak to the person because I didn't like the way he came off to me. So I wasn't gonna give him the satisfaction of knowing that I was capable of talking.
Right. Now that makes so much sense. And I think it leads us to the bigger part that we're going to be getting into for the rest of today's presentation. And that's that these things that are done that kind of perpetuate the biases and shade people's kind of, both conscious and unconscious interactions with people can actually lead to disparities, right? Where people maybe not only are they not being treated with the respect that they deserve, but it also could limit their access to the services and supports that they need. And so we all have a lot of work to do to create the change that is needed. And I think listening to the experiences of others is an important first step. So thank you, Liz, so much for sharing your thoughts and your stories and giving advice to all of us. And I'd like to now, next slide, please. I would like to also thank Blanca Navarro and Amparo Ceja, who have chosen to share their experiences with us through video. Please play the videos.
Good afternoon. The barrier of not speaking the English language is a lot. First, the IEP process doesn't reflect what was agreed on in the meetings, and the IEP reports. In all cases, once they are checked in Spanish, they have to be rewritten due to many irregularities. They send me the version in English, and I have to request it in Spanish, but I have to make corrections. It happens almost all the time. They know that I need an interpreter, and many times they don't do what they are supposed to do. My son has an intellectual disability, and this is harming his education. I have to demand those services constantly, and although they're getting better, but they still have not gotten to that point. They keep repeating these inconsistencies, and with the regional center, I initially focused on my coordinator when I called her to get guidance to get some type of service for my son's needs. She told me that she was not an emergency line, that my son was not her only client, and that she spoke with her clients only once a year. I complained to her supervisor, and they immediately changed my coordinator. Now, the barrier is that she doesn't speak Spanish, and I need someone who speaks Spanish. Thank you very much.
I do apologize. I am having technical difficulties. I will play the video in a second.
Good afternoon. My name is Amparo Ceja, and I'm from the MUMI Group. I'm the Vice President of the MUMI Group, and I'm here doing this short video to teach you what I've gone through to get help, like from the regional center. The district sometimes doesn't tell you about the help that there is, the programs that there are for you to get. And you often settle for what they say to you. You're not eligible for these programs. And that's how it's left. And that's how it's left. And you don't keep fighting for your kids, and you have to keep fighting. You have to keep saying to them, why not? I want you to explain to me, for what reason am I not eligible for these programs? You have to obtain the information you need. And I've already done it, thanks God, because Angel Picon, the man from California, has been teaching us so that we could learn how to ask for things. And yeah, when we ask for something now, if I ask for something and they don't want to give it to me, then I tell them, can you give me a signed or written letter explaining why I'm not eligible? And if I make that request, and as an aside, I'm illiterate, you could say, because I don't know how to read or write, and I've been through much more than you, but I've gotten by with help from my children. Because when a letter comes from me and I don't understand what it says, my children read it and they tell me what it means. Well, that's how I kept going forward. And I invite you to join us in this group and to carry it forward for our children, as they are the reason we keep fighting. We must learn how to ask for things and how to fight for our children. I'm addressing this invitation to you, and I thank Art California and Angel Picon. It is thanks to him I'm learning. If not, it would be difficult. So thanks, Angel and Art California. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a good afternoon.
Okay, so once again, I so appreciate Blanca and Amparo for sending us those videos so that we could relay their story to all of you. So now we would like to go ahead and find out a little bit from all of you. We're going to launch a poll and we encourage all of you to participate. The poll is anonymous, so go ahead and launch poll. What we are curious about is, are you aware that each regional center has a diversity specialist position? Yes or no? So it looks like about 50% of the vote is in. We will just wait another moment here because it looks like people are actively answering. We really appreciate that. All right, so we'll go ahead and close the poll. We have about 69% of everyone who voted, and it looks like 38% of you were aware of the cultural diversity specialist position, and 62 people currently are not. And don't worry if your answer was no to this question, because we have a couple of cultural diversity specialists with us here today to talk about what they do, to educate us more about how we can reduce disparity in the disability service system and how they are a resource in this endeavor. So thank you, Imani Pardue Bishop from Golden Gate Regional Center and Ruben Colon from San Andreas Regional Center for being with us today. You can go ahead and come on camera. Great, thank you so much for being here, and I'll go ahead and hand it off to you now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Imani. I am the Cultural Diversity Specialist with Golden Gate Regional Center.
Hello, my name is Ruben Colon, and I am the Diversity and Inclusion Specialist for the San Andreas Regional Center.
Yeah. So today we're going to be discussing and addressing unconscious bias and disparity, as well as our role as cultural diversity specialists. Next slide, please. So our goal, again, is to explain the role of the cultural diversity, or the CDS position, within the regional centers. We also hope to introduce concepts of linguistic competency and culturally responsive services or service delivery. I'm sorry, can you go back? Thank you.
Another thing that we also do is when we notice that there are issues related to service access and equity, we try to address those issues within our regional center system. And today we will also hear from some panelists, two consumers who receive regional center services. And we are encouraged for their opportunity to shed some light on their personal experiences in receiving regional center services.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm just going to give some quick history as to why the CDS role exists. So actually back in 2016, the California Department of Developmental Services, or DDS, found that there were disparities in purchase of service data based on race throughout all the regional centers in the state. And so in response to this, DDS gave funding for each regional center to hire a cultural diversity specialist. And with that, allocates $11 million each year to the regional centers for community-based organizations to develop culture and diversity and equity projects. And so, we go through a grant process throughout the year, and we submit to DDS and we are awarded funding. And these projects can last anywhere from a year to 2 years for a selected community. Next slide, please.
So another thing that us as the cultural specialist attend to is that we assist with proposing, developing, and carrying out efforts that address issues related to service access and equity. We also do a lot of administrative work, like completing documentation for the state regarding budgets. We form committees to support different projects. I find myself doing a lot of time performing outreach and establishing partnerships with local community-based organizations. Two things that we do each year is we provide cultural competence training for staff and board members. And every year we also conduct a purchase of service data presentation for the public. And during that meeting, we strive to receive information from the public about any issues related to service access. We also consult with different agency staff and vendors in our regional centers and seek ways how we could implement more culturally competent and appropriate services. This is just a few examples of what we do on a daily basis. Next slide.
So again, just to reiterate, again, this is not an exhaustive list of our responsibilities at CDS, and that there may be some variations across our roles across the state. Next slide, please. So let's talk about disparity. What is disparity? Especially within this context of service delivery. And so it really refers to any differences in quality of services that is not due to differences in needs or preferences. So within the context of purchase of service, or POS disparities, we're referring to the differences in receiving and using services between white people and people of other racial or ethnic groups. I want to take a second to note that when we're talking about service disparity, is not always indicative of intentional acts of racism by staff or providers. Sometimes we get where like disparity means like, oh, I'm being prejudiced or I'm being racist. It's rather reflective of how many communities are excluded from conversations concerning their support needs. It also reflects notions of unconscious or implicit bias of the individual's needs, no matter how well-intentioned. Even when attempting to treat individuals the same, bias can present itself. I would like to give a very quick example of what that can look like. There was a young woman that I worked with who was an artist, and she lived in a group home, and she had all this extra money that she needed to spend so that she could continue to receive her Social Security checks. This woman was African American, and it's important to note this because when I was asking about how to spend her funds, I asked her, when was the last time you got your hair done? And her service provider looked at me and said, well, we wash our hair every 2 to 3 days, like we do with all the other folks that live in the home. And so we actually had the opportunity to explain that that's actually too frequent for our hair type. And it can cause some damage and breakage. And suggested that we use the money so that this woman can go and go to a salon and get her hair done, which is something she really wanted. And it's an easy way to spend her funds. So that's an example of unconscious bias right there. We're attempting to treat everybody the same. However, that's not necessarily beneficial to this individual's personhood or to their support. Next slide, please.
Another thing that we strive to do in the Regional Center is to be responsive to different cultural issues. And cultural responsiveness is the ability to understand and provide services to people while taking into consideration their cultural and linguistic background. So I just wanted to also share what Parent Amparo said recently about learning how to ask for things. I wanted to share that today I participated in a respite committee meeting that we've been doing for the past year with a local family resource center in Monterey by the name of Special Kids Connect. And we took into consideration that respite services is a very common service that families use. However, there are many ways in which families have difficulty in knowing about the particular service and knowing how to request that service. So one of the things that today I became aware of during the meeting is how even with respite, there are different cultural dynamics that come out related to who is welcome into the home, who makes different decisions in the family. And I just wanted to share that example of how we at the Regional Center, in partnership with Family Resource Centers, CBOs, and we also include respite agencies and parents in the community, we've come up with this committee as a model to take into account the way that different families are receiving their services and trying to equip them with ways in which they can better access their services and providing them the information and the tools in their own language too. Next slide.
So how do we define culture? Culture can be defined as ideas, views, customs, and social behaviors, a lot of which Ruben just spoke to, associated with a specific group. And so culture influences a number of areas in our lives and how we interact with people and even how we provide services. It is surrounded in like our language and our communication, social courtesy, beliefs, roles and relationships, again, who is making the decisions in the family, rituals and customs, values and behaviors. Next slide.
Linguistic competency is another important part, which is the ability of an organization and its staff to communicate information in a way that is easily understood by diverse groups. And during our recent purchase of service meeting that we had this month, one of the feedback that I received from the public is that it was mentioned that the regional center, they felt, did a pretty good job at providing the services in the consumer and families language. However, when they would sometimes obtain a service from an agency or a provider, a direct service, sometimes they encountered situations in which maybe the agency did not have the staffing to be able to provide services that were either language or culturally appropriate. So at times that may have been the deciding factor whether a family choose a service or not.
It is important to note that it's not also always about your verbal communication style with linguistic competency, excuse me, but written materials, presentations, everything needs to be accessible. And it needs to be in plain language, not using heavy jargon or acronyms and things of that nature and expecting everybody to understand. So linguistic competency is also being mindful of those needs and ensuring accessibility in that way as well. Next slide. So here we have a pretty complex chart regarding cultural competency and how do we develop this cultural responsiveness and culturally responsive service delivery. So there's a few steps that come into play, including cultural sensitivity and cultural humility. And so we're gonna briefly go through each of these concepts and show how this is a constant cycle of work for you to do. There's never a one time I'm done, I've learned how to do this and now I get it and I can help anybody, but rather it is a process. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Cultural humility is really about an attitude rather than a set of skills. It's really letting yourself being open to new knowledge and experiences. You are ready to assess yourself. You're accepting your limitations, the knowledge that you don't know, and open to new ideas that may contradict what you think you know or what you have experienced. It's really like taking yourself in a lot of ways out of a situation to listen to the person or the family that you are providing support. Next slide.
Cultural sensitivity. It's also important to be conscious of other people's cultures and gain a deeper understanding of how these experiences affect their needs. Being familiar with the community, asking questions, listening, and being empathetic. There's another experience that I had in which the previous slide mentioned how important it is for mentors and people in the field who train and mentor other up and coming people working in the field of how to provide a service that is person-centered. I remember when I was a young intern in graduate school, my supervisor approached me and told me, tell me about a case. And I was working with a Vietnamese senior who was working on trying to graduate on time. And this young man told me that he didn't like the idea of me inviting his father into a meeting and having a discussion. And the supervisor asked me, well, why are you doing that? And I told her, well, that's how I learned how to do things at the agency I've worked for so long. And it's worked for me, for the other populations I've worked with. And she really taught me how to, at that moment, listen to what the person was requesting and not putting my own feelings of what was appropriate. And I'm so glad that I had that experience because we were able to meet my client's goals in the way that he wanted to, not the way that I felt that he needed to.
Thank you. Next slide. And so when we're getting into cultural responsiveness, we are now talking about services and supports that are responsive to the beliefs and interpersonal styles attitudes, language, all those aspects of culture that we discussed earlier, of the person receiving the services. And really the benefits of this is just the positive outcomes for the service delivery and interventions. They're more likely to succeed when the services are more culturally responsive. It also just requires accountability. And that's really the key to balancing the cultural competency piece and that humility piece. And understanding that this competency is something that's continuous work. And it really can just affect, again, how you communicate, your values, that person's values. And also, I just want to add another thing too, to what Ruben said, which I think was an excellent point, is understand that that person served is the expert in their experience, right? So we can go to the next slide. And so again, you kind of just, I want to wrap up just by saying that you can see this cycle at work between cultural sensitivity, humility, and ultimately cultural responsiveness. Next slide. So I actually turn it back over to Amber so we can get started on this panel.
Yes, thank you so much, Ruben and Imani. Please stay with us. And we're really excited about the fact that we have some additional panelists with us. So Liz Grisby, if you could go ahead and rejoin us, that would be great. And I'd also like to introduce Emily Barbar, who is a student at Glendale Community College. So I will hand it back over to you, Imani, and welcome panelists.
Hi. Wait for everybody to get on. Okay. And waiting for Liz.
I think you can go ahead and get started, Imani, and then we'll see if Liz needs a little tech support.
Sounds good. So Emily, can you just tell us a bit about the communities that you identify with?
So I am part of an Easter Seals group called the Peer-to-Peer Group. And I'm also a college student. So prior to that group, when I was a teen, I aged out, and so I didn't transition into the adult group because I felt like I didn't mesh with those individuals. So I felt that that group didn't really teach me like the skills to be independent, and they weren't able to like accommodate like my busy schedule because I was like an athlete. I couldn't really go, I couldn't attend, and I was like penalized for it. So like 2 years ago, I was able to find a group with the Lanterman Regional Center. And And this group helped me like express myself freely, and it allowed me to have this like safe space to interact with people from different ages, different ethnicities, and talk about sensitive topics that we didn't really talk about in my previous group that I was in. And for my entire life, I was mistaken for being Armenian or having a disability, which caused some people to treat me unkindly. And I was relieved that I was able to find the peer-to-peer group because it wasn't easy. It was a process.
Yeah, that sounds really challenging. Thank you, Emily. And then Liz, can you briefly just touch on some of the communities that you identify with as well?
I identify with the African American community and the LGBT community and the disability community. So, yeah.
Thank you. And so a question for both of you. How do you access supports in your communities? This again could be your services with DDS or your regional center. This could be within just your social and your peer groups. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I get help from my regional center, Golden Gate, where I'm a client, but I'm also employed there.
Mm-hmm.
I also work for Golden Gate as a rights advocate. So kind of getting the both worlds of in and out, but it has never been easy.
Yeah.
I have a question for both of you, either one of you. Tell us about a time when someone viewed or assumed you were not as capable or able based on your appearance.
Oh Lord.
About her appearance. I was bullied a lot for my appearance, and it really affected me as I became an adult. And it was very hard to find myself, like starting college, you know, after high school. So, yeah.
Thank you, Emily.
For me, several things, but I'll just say when I first started working for Golden Gate Regional Center, I don't think some of my colleagues knew how capable I was to be the rights advocate. So I just sat in my office all day staring at the computer. I couldn't access by myself until I had a new supervisor who told me, you need to shake up the community, and you need to start shaking up this regional center and let them know who you really are. So that's when I took it among myself to let it be known I'm a force to be reckoned with.
Absolutely. Being able to work so closely with you, Liz, I believe that to be true. So to follow up on that, and just from those experiences and those challenges, what is some, not so much advice, but what are some ideas that you have on ways that your community, so family members, your service providers, your friends, people that you interact with, can foster more inclusion? It's a pretty loaded question, right? And of course, it's not your responsibility to do that. But so what are some thoughts on how can we improve just being more inclusive? Those of us that hope to be a part of this community and support this community.
Well, for me, I think it starts with having allies like you and Monty, since we are co-workers. Like that time in our kitchen area where you seen somebody cut me off from a conversation that I was having with you about work, and you were just like, you kind of you stood up for me and said, wait, she was talking and you just cut her off. It's like more people need to realize and not be afraid to stand up for our community. More people like you need to be a champion and say this isn't right.
Emily, do you have any thoughts?
Basing off of what Liz said, we need to teach people how to be like advocates for themselves and to learn to speak up and not be afraid. We need to be teaching this to young children as well. We shouldn't wait until it's too late for them to understand that they don't have a voice, because that's definitely something that I didn't have, but I want the next generation to be able to voice how they feel.
But Emily, you found your voice and you have it now. Also, I want to add, it takes parents with disabled children not to be afraid to let their son or daughter go out and into the real world and face challenges. That's the only way they're going to become advocates and self-independent and grow. And it starts, like Emily said, it starts when you're young.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this panel. I can't think of a better way to wrap it up than building a community of advocates and allies. I think that really is a way forward. And thank you for being open and honest, because open and honest conversations are really key to making this happen and starting to see a change. So I want to thank all of you. Really quickly, if it's possible, one question that did come into the chat, and this one would be for Amani and Ruben, are the cultural diversity specialists at the regional centers available for trainings for vendors and providers or individuals? Anyone out there?
I know at my regional center that I am open to doing some cultural diversity trainings and available to do that for service providers. Also, just very general introductions to our services and who we support as well.
Right, right. But I think really at the end of the day, we learn more from each other, right? So Emily and Liz, so for anyone who's out there, speak to each other, ask the people who used your services. I think that they can probably give us the most education that we can possibly get. But it's wonderful to hear that the cultural diversity specialists are another resource that we have available to us. So thank you, everyone.
This is Ruben. I just wanted to mention I am also available as a resource. Our catchment area covers Santa Clara, San Benito, Monterey, and Santa Cruz County. So feel free to reach out to get my contact information.
Thank you so much. All right, well, thank you to all of our panelists. I appreciate your time here today. And now what I would like to do is we're going to watch one more video I want to thank Amada Ampia, who was kind enough to provide us a video so that we can hear a little bit more about accessing resources. So please play the video.
Hello, my name is Amada Ampia. I'm a mother to 2 sons who were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. I currently assist with and participate in community events where I receive support, newsletters in English and Spanish. Based on my experience, I can say that I've learned to navigate the system and request resources in my language. In general, I get involved in bilingual programs, and when I request support and I look for resources based on my son's needs, I do so by searching for assistance in Spanish. But if there isn't a translator at that time, then an appointment is scheduled. And if I'm on a telephone call and they don't have a person who can assist me in my language, then we agree that they will return my telephone call to deal with the subject in my language, and in that way to resolve my concerns. I recommend not being afraid when requesting information and help in our language, because in reality, there is support in our community that allows us to get involved, to have more information on how to help our children. We can always request it in our language so that even though we don't speak English very well, we can always be in our children's activities, educating ourselves, searching for resources on the internet, searching for all of the resources where they can give you information to be able to help our children. Thank you.
So thank you again so much, Amada, for sending us your story, your video to share for others to learn from. I think it really, sharing each other's stories really makes a huge impact. And now what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce Patricia Albano, Director of Projects and Outreach with the ARC of California, as well as Congreso Familiar, to share another approach to including and embracing cultural and linguistic diversity in the service system. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Amber, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Imara for her wise words in that video and for sharing the effective strategies that she has used to advocate for herself in order to receive services for her children. As you heard, there are usually extra steps that families have to take to effectively advocate for themselves for what they need when bilingual staff is not readily available. So thank you so much, Imara. Next slide, please. Today, I will be talking about the Navigator Promotoras model, and some of you might already be familiar with this, but they are community leaders who are used in different settings. They are well-respected individuals who are recognized in the community as being trustworthy, and this is important because we are able to build those trusting relationships with families by providing their shared experience of having a child with a disability and understanding their language and culture. As parents ourselves, we are able to share our own experiences, our own challenges, but also our successes. It's important for parents to know that we are experiencing the same challenges they are, and we are able to provide support and guidance. It's important also to note that the difference between working with professionals and working with a promotora or a navigator, it's different. It's a different perspective. Professionals will provide us with information on policies, procedures. They can connect us to resources, but navigators and promotoras will provide those practical tips that families can utilize when navigating or accessing services. So we know that being relatable is powerful. We also help build that bridge between regional center and families. This model allows us to focus resources on those underserved families to ensure more families know how to access and utilize regional center services. Next slide, please. And why are promotoras or navigators important? We work with families one-on-one to prioritize needs and assist them in accessing services and supports. This is the most effective way of doing outreach to these communities, especially when you have someone that speaks their language. We know that simply sending out email blasts is just not enough, but those personal connections we are able to make, those are crucial. We recognize that doing this type of outreach takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, but it has been proven to work. Parents report having a better understanding of their child's disability and how to navigate systems. And by having someone that speaks their language, it provides an opportunity for a more robust conversation, and they feel more comfortable asking questions. Parents also increase their understanding of how to overcome barriers. They also improve their skills for advocating for their child and improve communication with professionals. Services are provided either through phone contacts, in-office appointments, and home visits whenever possible. And all of these can be offered under alternative services. Now I'd like to share an example of a conference that has been around for over 40 years. And for 16 years, it has been running under Congreso Familiar, which has become a household name here in Northern California. Congreso Familiar is a conference dedicated to promoting education and leadership to monolingual Spanish-speaking families with children or relatives with developmental disabilities of all ages. We provide education on topics such as how to navigate and access regional center services. We do IEP trainings. We talk about conservatorship, Social Security, adult transition, just to name a few. Congreso Familiar has a long history of supporting a community that has had limited resources. And what makes Congreso Familiar unique is everything is in their language. There are no barriers, and it lends itself for parents to openly want to share. We know that it is harder for families to ask questions when the presentation is not in their language, even when there are interpreters. And research has shown that people who learn in their primary language are more likely to understand and retain information. This past year, we were able to pivot to an online platform and provide virtual presentations. There are a lot of challenges that became apparent that our next presenter will talk about, but we also saw it as an opportunity for many more families from other parts of California, other states, and even internationally who were able to take advantage of these supports because a lot of communities do not offer these supports or resources in their language. Next slide, please. So here are a couple of things to consider. Interpreters, if at all possible, if you are able to have interpreters, please do. It is a much needed service, but do keep in mind that not all interpreters are experienced. They might not all understand the disability culture, and there are language variations. There may be maybe 2 to 3 ways of saying something. So having bilingual staff is always a better option. Answer the phone in their language. Again, have bilingual staff. Families will call if there's a chance that someone will answer the phone in their language and who will understand their culture. Returning calls in a timely manner. I think that is true for everybody. And lastly, the biggest thing that we've had success with is having cultural celebrations. We've had celebrations for Dia de los Muertos, which is Day of the Dead. You can have a Halloween celebration. You can do a Chinese New Year celebration. And these have all been done virtually. And we know that these things are important because people like sharing and learning about each other's culture. We can talk about food, traditional costumes, and it can all be done virtually. Lastly, I'd just like to end with this. The need for cultural programming is critical. And remember that language barriers become daunting to our communities, but there are ways that we can be inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. That was really great. I love how you were able to really bring actionable things that all of us through alternative services can start to do better at and to bring a little bit more and really have a lot of fun that's going to enrich everybody's lives by taking some really important critical steps here. So I'd also like to introduce from the ARC of California, Angel Picon, to speak to us on the realities of what additional supports and disparity have really been exacerbated during this time of the pandemic. So Angel, if you could please join me now. All right, go ahead and take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Gracias, Patricia. Thank you, everyone else. California is indeed a very diverse, but is not a one size fits all, even when we provide our services. We are the same, but very unique. This past year left many of us figuring out alternative ways to continue to offer our services. Whether you are a direct service provider or a consumer, a parent with intellectual and developmental disability family member, the pandemic was an eye-opener to many of the people we are trying to help. The reality was that many did not understand that many of us we already knew, but we did not know what the families we serve went through. The political environment was not appropriate for our consumers They were scared. They were not necessarily willing to give out accurate information. And while we were trying to serve this population, that this is a real need of, that they are in real needs of services. They were struggling with the effects of unintended consequences of the pandemic and the political environment we were all in. At the beginning of the pandemic, I started to gear people towards telehealth. Telehealth is the delivery of healthcare, health education, and health information services via remote technologies. I suggested to them to call the providers and see if they had a form of getting services online. I had to translate to Spanish all the official papers coming from the federal and state governments about COVID-19. I made phone calls to people I knew that didn't have a computer. I also realized that our intellectual and developmental disability families who will need extra assistance for their special education students so they can continue with their individual educational programs or IEP programs and services from their school districts. That failed miserably. We needed to find an alternative way to provide services. As was mentioned several times, know the people you are serving, their language, culture, traditions, customs, and where they frequent in their communities. The regional center's coordinator have something in common with the people they serve? Are the people you are helping know how to write, read? We need to be conscientious of the people we do know. First generation immigrants have many challenges. Some of those challenges are, in some of our community do not know how to read, as we heard from Amparo earlier. We can discuss why they do not know how to read some other time. Some do not speak the English language, and some do not know how to drive, nor do they have a vehicle. Some do not have a computer, and if they do have one, they don't know how to use it. Some do not know how to use Zoom or other means of communicating or how to use telehealth. However, they do understand less complicated applications like smartphones. They are more visual than they are at reading or following written instructions. What are the alternative services? Alternative services means that various programs, services, and supports, regardless of funding source, other than home and community-based services, that exist as part of a developmental disability service system and other service systems. It was during the pandemic that we realized that the digital divide was much worse. We had to determine the technology needs. Language barriers, translate in real-time translation, we needed to disseminate this information quickly. Some people are not able to drive, as was mentioned before. The solutions that we were able to provide computer training in their language, understand who they are and how they function, offer to go beyond and above your own expectations. Be conscientious when offering webinars or any online workshops where your audience primary language is other than English. Technology, computer training, you have to think outside the box. Just because of time constraints, I would like to refer you to our January 27 webinar titled Unlocking Technology as a Key to Connecting in Alternative Services. You'll see the link in one of the slides and refer back to the webinar's main page. And more specific, look into what our chapter in Ventura has been doing in the community. They approach this thinking outside the box approach, providing new ideas and furthering alternative services to our IDD community. In closing, I would offer the following idea. There are many school districts in the Central Valley that may or may not have a transitional educational program. Perhaps these ideas of alternative services are the key in creating alternative services and programs to educate our new intellectual and developmental disability generation of our youth. Maybe we need to change our mindset. Change is not easy, we understand. Perhaps this is an opportunity to profoundly change the regional center and how we serve our intellectual and developmental disability community. In providing these services, we need to find alternative solutions to finding alternative services. I would also argue that this is a great opportunity to give out IDD students to develop a great transitional program for our young people. We need willing organizations in putting all this together. Our Arc Ventura is a great example in how we can do this throughout the state. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angel, and thank you for offering yourself as a resource along with other previous webinars for people to access if they're needing more information on how to better approach and decrease these kind of the tech gap, right, and the disparity that we're seeing. So thank you so much for being here today. Also, we have a couple of resource slides here. This slide has resources that were referenced specifically in this webinar. Next slide. We also have some additional resources and places where you can find trainings on the topics we've discussed today. Next slide. And we do hope to see everybody in 2 weeks at our next webinar. I know it's a topic top of mind of everybody right now, planning for community re-engagement in the next phase of disability services. Join this free webinar to hear from providers of transportation, day services, and more to find out what is next for our service system. Next slide. Please think of us as a resource as well. And if you're interested in continuing this conversation and speaking and having live Q&A with some of the panelists who were here today, we hope you register and join us for our Lunch and Learn this Friday at noon. You can register at lunchandlearn.disabilitythriveinitiative.org. And if you go to our website, disabilitythriveinitiative.org, you'll find much more that you can access there. A resource library, you can request consultation on this topic or any other topic related to alternative services. Next slide. So thank you for being here. Please feel free to reach out. We love hearing from you. You can email us at info@disabilitythriveinitiative.org or call us at 916-238-8811. And we'd love to start hearing from you right now. As you leave, if you would please take just a moment to fill out our survey. We love to hear how we can improve on our future webinars and what sort of topics and of interest we can look at in regards to alternative services in the future. So thank you again, everyone, for being here today. I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week.